Okay, I am here recording at what for me is a late hour, having just finished Vineland. I haven't done a review in 2 weeks, and part of that has just been life getting really hectic at this time when I'm getting ready to move, and also sort of being split between two books, or rather, a novel and a collection of short stories. And the novel I also should mention that between when I finished the last book that I read, which was Contraposto, I already don't remember. Oh my god. Yeah, that's just where my mind has been at with just how much is going on. Is I don't even remember what I last read because I tried to start reading Book of Numbers, and with Book of Numbers, it was I knew it was supposedly like the first big book about the internet. But what I didn't realize when it was called the Book of Numbers, I thought it meant binary, and it turns out it actually means also biblically the actual Book of Numbers, which I know some about the Bible, a bit more than some people in some respects, because I was raised and went to Bible school for a bit of my life, but I don't know enough about like specifics in the Book of Numbers to feel like I was able to really appreciate that book at the time. So I decided to just donate it, and I'll come back to it later if I feel like it. And I don't know why I decided to pick up Vineland, aside from I've been kind of dumping, not really dumping, but I've been kind of down on Pynchon in a lot of my reviews, which is kind of weird in the sense that I didn't dislike Inherent Vice or The Crying of Lot 49, which Inherent Vice is described as Pynchon light, and I decided to just go ahead and pick up Vineland and see how I felt about it, whether or not I wanted to donate Vineland and V, or if I wanted to keep them and take them back with me. And the curious thing is Vineland, again, much like Inherent Vice, is apparently regularly described as Pynchon light. And it gives me really, at this point, I've talked about in the past with some of my reviews how I don't like to really judge an author after one book, two books really, but sometimes some authors it takes three to really get a good triangulation on their style. And what I really appreciate between Vineland, The Crying of Lot 49, and Inherent Vice is the dynamicism of Pynchon as a writer, to where I feel like The Crying of Lot 49, which I've not read it in a long time. I almost feel usually I have a rule about not talking about books that I haven't read or art in over 5 years, and that is so far out of the 5 year mark. But I remember at the time finding it very difficult to follow. Inherent Vice, a little bit easier to follow. Vineland was surprisingly pretty easy to follow in terms of like the actual plot, the actual what is going on from scene to scene, which I wasn't expecting. Especially from Gravity's Rainbow, which I never fully tried, but I understand to be, and I think I tried a little bit of it, and it jumps all over the place, and it's not very focused, which I understand is not the point, but to me was very indicative of what I talk about when I talk about postmodernist novels being more clever and deconstructive than they are actually enjoyable to read. Particularly for somebody like me who likes characters, and that's why I was really surprised with Vineland, because Vineland, much like Inherent Vice, which I thought Inherent Vice would be the exception to the rule since it's the one that a lot of people bring up, Vineland very much has a heart to its story, which I wasn't expecting. But in the characters of Zoid and Prairie, there is just this emotional core to it that is very tied up in the characters and the people involved that helps ground a lot more of the political and really mostly political other aspects and elements to the story. And that, for me, was what was so compelling and what made me ultimately finish it, even though, much like what I've talked about with Caratescu, where I found it took me a long time to really be able to pin down exactly what it was about his work that didn't gel with me. It's much the same. This book is much the same for me in the sense that I feel like I should have enjoyed it a lot more than I did, because it has a lot about it that I do enjoy, but the actual process of reading it regularly, I just struggled to engage with the actual book. But we'll get into that later, because what is this book? This book is the story of Zoid, to a lesser extent, but really this is the story of Frenzy, or Ferenzi. I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce it. At any rate, who this is a story about the death of the hippie movement, specifically told through Frenzy, who gets kind of wrapped up in it, but then gets into a relationship with an FBI agent named Brock Vond, who manages to turn her to ultimately betray the hippie movement that she kind of believed in before, and how in the present day, Brock Vond, thanks to the new Reagan administration, is given basically unlimited power and is absolutely destroying everything that's left of Frenzy's life, whether it be her ex Zoid, who is the character that we're introduced to, but more specifically going after Prairie, who is the daughter of Zoid and Frenzy's first child. So this is really the story about the past, the story about the relationship between the hippie movement and the government, and the falling out and really failing of the hippie movement. In terms of would I recommend this book, I mean, yeah, sure. I don't. It's interesting because when it comes to getting into Pynchon, The Crying of Lot 49, Inherent Vice, and Gravity's Rainbow are the three that you're kind of really pushed towards. And I find it interesting, Inherent Vice over Vineland, just in the sense specifically that Inherent Vice is always recommended because it's so easy to follow. And while Vineland is more complex to follow, I found its sort of emotional core, the sort of it's so late. The family dynamic more emotionally resonant than Doc's story in Inherent Vice. But so I'm surprised Vineland doesn't end up more in the conversation of where to start with Pynchon. But yeah, in that sense, I definitely think it would be as good an introduction as Inherent Vice to his work. And if you've already read Inherent Vice, then absolutely, and you enjoyed it, I suppose I should be more clear, then I think that you really should give Vineland a try, because there are a lot of parallels between them, where Inherent Vice feels like it really focused in on what Zoid sort of was and represented as a character, and his relationship with Hector, and Hector's relationship with commercialism and things like that. So in that sense, if you really liked Inherent Vice and the things that it had going for it, then definitely pick up Vineland. Inherent Vice came later and definitely feels like Pynchon revisiting a lot of the ideas. So in terms of getting into the pros and the cons, one of the pros, it's impossible to talk about the nature of the book for me without talking about the sheer density of it in terms of how many different levels of things are going on. And this can be a pro or a con, depending on how you read. And this is one of the things that made it such a difficult book to read. It's a book that really demands multiple readings, because the book is operating on what I'll call at least three, probably more, layers. There's or maybe it's four even. There's the top base layer, which is just the plot, the story of Zoid, of Brock, of Frenzy, and of I already forgot her name, Prairie. I am so out of it right now. Anyway, yeah, Prairie. just as it is taken very literally. There's that story, but then underneath it, there's the obvious metaphors and parallels between a lot of what was going on at the time. Brock is very much meant to be an embodiment of the government, of the system, and Zoid is meant to be very much an embodiment of the hippie movement. And while there are other characters, there's very much a metaphoric angle going on to this, or maybe a parable angle might be more accurate. I don't know. At any rate, many of the characters are as much stand-ins for ideas, time periods, concepts, and movements as they are actual characters unto themselves. But then beneath that metaphoric, not even beneath, but sort of existing in parallel, and this is where things get so hard to parse, is an absurdity that is comical, but at the same time really difficult to parse for me, between what is literally happening and what is happening metaphorically. So the Thanatoids are a great example of this, where they're described as dead people whose karmatic justice remains unfulfilled. But for a long time, to me, it was this question of, are they literally dead, or are they metaphorically sort of the disenfranchised people who are alive but have been sort of forced to inhabit a system in which they no longer believe in it, and thus exist perennially outside it in this sort of zombie-like state? And I definitely think there is an element of the former, but then later on, not to get into spoilers, but when a character who is absolutely assuredly dead shows up as a Thanatoid, it then becomes obvious that, okay, they are literally dead. There is a sequence in which one of the characters is investigating in Japan a hole in the ground as an insurance adjuster that is suggested to have been made by Godzilla, and it's literally Godzilla. And this is what I mean when I say, like, it's operating on these three levels: the literal story, the metaphorical story, and then this layer of absurd super reality that it becomes really difficult to pick apart where things are kind of falling in these three circles. And this is where, to me, as somebody who doesn't read a lot of Pynchon, I found it very difficult to engage with the work, to try and sort of get the emotional core of the main story, which is what I personally tend to be more interested in. But again, trying to figure out the sort of absurdity versus the metaphors going on with the government aspect, because the book can be riotously funny, but the way it's written, everything is given the same sort of metered tone to the prose. Whether it's that emotional core, whether it's the metaphorical core, whether it's the humor and absurd core, it's all written with the same sort of tone. Which, one of the biggest things for me was, to kind of back up, but I promise this will explain it a bit where I'm going with this. One of the things that attracted me to Pynchon in the first place was watching the trailer for Inherent Vice, the film. I think it's it's not Wes Anderson, it's Paul Thomas Anderson, I think. Doing that film, the trailer for Inherent Vice is absolutely fucking hilarious. The way it's cut, the music that's used, and everything really brings the jokes out and presents them in ways that are laugh out loud funny. But then when I saw the actual movie itself, the way it's shot, it's not really shot like a comedy. You know, you don't have the sort of comedy framing, and when something funny does happen, it doesn't kind of have those, like, comedy timings and beats. So you end up not really sure if the thing was meant to be a joke or not until you kind of stop and think about it and go, yeah, okay, that was funny. That was clever. It's sort of almost so clever that just the timing is sort of off. And that drove me to read the book because I was almost sure that the book would be much better because it wouldn't have that same sort of issue. But really, with Vineland, it's the same thing. Sort of watching the movie, I realized that Paul Thomas Anderson. I hope to God it's Paul Thomas Anderson, and I'm not making a complete shit out of myself. In fact, I'm going to pause this and go look it up. Paul Thomas Anderson. Hooray! I'm not a complete dumbass. Paul Thomas Anderson actually did a really good job of capturing Pynchon's style, but I'm still left with kind of the same feeling where you can be reading one chapter about the Nixonian crackdown on drugs and hippie culture, and how this translates then into the Reagan era and the crackdowns going on there and the budgeting going on, and how cutting government fundings could potentially out God, not snitches, I can't remember, the people in witness protection, that's the word. The people in witness protection could be outed by cutting government funding because there's no longer the support for them, and consequently they're removed from the system, they're no longer getting their checks, and they're vulnerable to anybody who could potentially go after them. So, very serious thing. I'd never even considered that aspect of government funding. So, very important thing. Not, just serious within the context of the book. Then, a few chapters later, you're following a character who's describing going through training in Japan to become a ninjet, talking about how she learns the vibrating fist, which can be used to kill a man 1 year after coming into contact with him, and how she's been kidnapped and forced to work in this brothel, all for a plan to get close to Brock Vance and hit him with the vibrating palm. And it is delivered in the same tone as what was earlier being described by the budget cuts. It's delivered all in the same vibe and the same general, I don't want to say dryness, but kind of long descriptive paragraphs. Very technical word choice, and rather than kind of short, snappy sentences, like I said, long flowing sentences and very long paragraphs, it's the same cadence. So it's not really until I'm kind of partway through reading this that I'm just kind of like, is this really happening? Is this a fever dream? Is this somebody being like stoned out of their mind? Am I supposed to be taking this seriously? Is this like, do they literally believe in a vibrating fist that can kill somebody? Okay, they literally believe in this particular world this is a real thing that can actually work. And that lack of clarity in the rules of the world make the sort of real, the metaphor, and the absurd clash. It's like, is this a metaphor for something that this is real in the world? Or is it just kind of the sort of wacky humor of the book? Because the cultural references are another thing that I find interesting, because there's so many cultural references, and a lot of them fly over my head. But even from the ones that I do get, I can see how some of them can be kind of central, and it just makes me wonder how insanely dated this book would feel to like somebody younger, and not necessarily in like the message, because the message I think is really interesting and has as much truth today, especially under Trump's administration, as it did in sort of back when it was written in 1990, reflecting back on the Reagan administration. So it's not that it's dated thematically, it's just that it's such a sort of zany funhouse of references and absurdities and sort of just crazy off the wall plotting, but at the same time, all presented in prose that isn't itself not in the slightest bit manic, but like I said, sort of long, flowing, sort of has a nudge, nudge, wink, wink edge to it sometimes, but most of the time has almost a technical aspect to it, a technical edge to it. So, like I said, is it a pro or is it a con? I don't know, because Pynchon is such a popular author, and it might just come down to a matter of taste, where I don't want to suggest that, all humor strikes the same way, where to me, like, these jokes aren't landing correctly. They aren't hitting, like I said, going back to Inherent Vice, that trailer made me die laughing. The actual movie is interesting, but not particularly funny. And it's all the exact same stuff. Those exact same scenes from the trailer are in the movie. It's just the cut and the music completely change the tone and the delivery to the point where it's no longer laugh out loud funny. It's just, oh, yeah, that was a joke. Okay, yeah, I'm going to have to pause the movie and think about that one for a second. And it's just the same thing. You read a passage and you go, was that a joke? Or was that a metaphor? Or was that just part of the story? And you kind of have to, like, think about it for a moment, which really, for me, interrupts the process of reading. But I can absolutely appreciate how, for someone else, this could be the particular cocktail that really gives them that sort of vibe. So this is where, like, I'm talking about it in the pro-con section, but I can't call it a pro or a con, because for me, it's so close to being there. I love the idea of the comedy. I love the metaphors that are being played with, and like I said from the start, I like the emotional story, but they just didn't quite come together for me as well as I feel like they could have, had there been a bit more diversity, had the comedy aspect, the absurdity of it, been played, like, described differently from the more serious aspects of the book. But another reason that I wouldn't really necessarily criticize the book for this as well is I confess that I don't necessarily feel like I came away with the strongest grasp of the book, because going back to what I said about the sort of cultural references, it's not just like Star Wars references or Star Trek references or TV references and so on and so forth, but a lot of the government projects play on real government projects. And again, when I know what some of the real is, and you put it next to some of the stuff that Timesplitters made up, I can sort of see and appreciate the what's going on here. But when I have no idea what is real and what isn't, what's being exaggerated and what isn't, then it makes it harder to see fully what's going on with the story. So to take Brock as a character, for instance, everything I've read, from the little bit that I've read of the book online, everybody interprets Brock as the government, the system, the sort of American government. And while I appreciate and agree in most contexts with that, I think it can also run into a little bit of oversimplification, because one of the few times, probably the only time in the book, that we actually get Brock's perspective of things that isn't the ending, which felt really, really rushed and really confusing. We see that Brock has his own insecurities, that he wants to be one of the people making the choices, one of the people, sort of the political superpowers that will never have to worry about anything that goes on, that will always sort of survive whatever comes of anything. These sort of legacy people, like, your Rupert Murdochs or whatever, like, just the people who are giving orders. But he also understands that by virtue of his birth alone, he will never be one of them. So in that way, while you do have Brock as metaphor for the government, he's also a metaphor for a specific type of person in the government, which is that type of person who very much buys into the system because he wants to be the system, but also carries with him this insecurity, this knowledge that the very system that he is working so hard for never loves him back in the way that he wants. However perverted that want is, it is still ultimately a sort of denying him that kind of satisfaction. So it's like, yes, on the one hand, Brock is a metaphor for the government, but this is where I talk about the story operating on multiple levels, because he can't be exclusively a metaphor for the government while also still having this insecurity unto himself about never being able to fully be the government. And again, this comes back to understanding where what's real and what is the humor, what is the exaggeration, what is the metaphor, that makes the book so dense and requires multiple read-throughs, but also a really solid understanding of some of the activities that were going on during that time period to fully appreciate. And the only other thing I'd really want to say in this section is the book jumps around a lot without making it fully clear when it's jumping around, which it's not that I had a difficult time keeping track of things. It's more that in terms of a flow, it was frustrating to constantly keep getting interrupted, to start a chapter in the present for 3 paragraphs, then be in the past for 20 pages, then be back in the present. And it's just like, why not just start the chapter in the past and then bring it to the present? Or, for instance, the finale, like I said, just seems to be this crushed timeline of events where things just kind of happen off screen. I guess we're at the party now. One second we're at a hotel, the next second we're at a party, the next second it's a few weeks later, a few days later. I don't know. The timeline is getting fucky because it just feels like everything's kind of rushing towards a conclusion. And yeah, just I found that aspect, the jumping around, and with how frequently it jumped around and when it chose to jump around, to just really interrupt the overall flow of the story. And now we get into themes, and there's a lot that I could talk about in terms of the themes of this book. Specifically, like I said, we live in an era of Trump, and in a lot of ways, I see some parallels between Nixon and Reagan and Trump, particularly in their expansion of federal power, particularly in the way that they use federal agencies to crack down on people. Trump is extremely naked about the way that he does it, because he's frankly too much of a dipshit to even bother hiding it. But frankly, you can see clearly how much the populace has declined in terms of the fact that he doesn't even have to pretend. He can get away with it anyway. The Watergate scandal that sank Nixon is such a minor nothing compared to the political scandals of today, frankly, Trump or otherwise, that it really is a different era to where, one of the big things in Vineland is, and I think this was a theme in Inherent Vice too, but I can't really remember, TV and the numbing effects of TV and how TV can be used to reprogram people, specifically with regards to police brutality and police violence, by showing cop shows and cop dramas and showing police in this sort of heroic light constantly, to rewire people to view the police as heroes, and to overlook a lot of the more questionable aspects of the job. And in that sense, you don't even need that nowadays, to just tie off what I was saying about Trump. But in that sense, there is so much, the aspect of using the tube to reprogram people versus nowadays it's social media. And like I said, it is so easy to draw these sort of parallels. And a lot of this, from what I've gathered, is pretty indicative of a lot of Pynchon's work. Paranoia, government overreach, so on and so forth. So one thing, it's difficult for me to then talk about because I feel like I'm just regurgitating what people who understood the book way better than I did can tell you. And when I'm talking about themes, I want to try and give my own original thoughts and original twists on things, which is why I usually don't cover every single theme, aside from just time purposes, but also because you can get things from anywhere else, but you're here on my channel, so I want to give you my specific views and takes. So rather than cover, like I said, Brock as the government and Zoid as the hippie movement and all these sort of other things that, like I said, you can get from anywhere else, there's one specific aspect, and I hate to sort of take this extremely complicated book and have my themes section focus on one relatively simple thing, but this is sort of the thing that have never heard talked about with this book, but that really spoke to me. And it's this particular passage that is being spoken by a character who has become kind of a leader of this university, which is uprisen and become its own independent nation. In another one of the book's absurdities, yes, a college campus rises up and declares itself an independent nation, in something that reminds me very much of the Family Guy episode where Peter's house isn't on the map. Because, again, this is the absurdity of the book. It is a very absurd book. And it's the leader of the uprising is called Weed, because, again, metaphoric names. You have Frenzy, literally. Weed, how about picking up a gun? We know it's supposed to be wrong, but we don't know why. Once, he would have proclaimed, because in this country, nobody in power gives a shit about any human life but their own. This forces us to be humane, to attack what matters more than life to the regime and those it serves, their money and their property. But these days, he was saying, it's wrong because if you pick up a rifle, the man picks up a machine gun. By the time you find some machine gun, he's all set to shoot rockets. Begin to see a pattern? Between those two replies, something had happened to him. He was still preaching humane revolution, but seemed darkly exhausted, unhopeful, snapping at everybody, then apologizing. And I think the reason that this really spoke to me is because I see it reflected in a lot of today's rhetoric. The breakdown, to me, between a plan, an objective, and a method of attack, breaking down into just lashing out against a sort of ideological superpower, against a sort of all-knowing force, and this sort of defeatist attitude that is simultaneously impotent, but filled with malice and absolutely unhelpful to any kind of productivity, to just sort of blame others and write off the whole cause as impossible. And like I said, it's not an aspect of the book that I see brought up a lot in discussions. Granted, I haven't exactly gotten to a deep dive of instructions, but it really stood out to me in terms of the nuance on display in this book with regards to the hippie movement. While Pynchon is, I got from Inherent Vice, definitely very sympathetic to the hippies over the establishment, and definitely this book, the hippies are way more sympathetic than the establishment. I appreciate the actual critical look into the failures of the hippie movement, the sort of labeling of the hippie movement as a youth revolution that really was more youthful outburst than actually having the grounding and standing of a full-on revolution, and the consequences that came out of that. Sort of people threw punches that they didn't really think about, and then got punched back twice as hard, weren't ready for it, and many people capitulated under it. And in that sense, what really was the hippie movement about? What was it for? And I like this quote for, again, just the rapid degradation from intellectual argument, from actually having a plan, having a focus, having a goal in mind, to just ranting against a system that you grossly dislike. And if there's one other theme, or rather way that the theme is handled, that I feel like I want to bring up and appreciate, it's Frenzy, and the way that Frenzy is never really redeemed as a character. Her betrayal of the hippie movement, of weed and the campus, is never justified either on a humane level or on an ideological level. Ideologically, she had no reason to do it. And on a humane level, it was an absolutely terrible thing to do. And something that she pretends to feel remorse for, but which obviously doesn't really haunt her all that much. She says that it does. She claims that it does. And you definitely don't get the sense that she's super duper happy with where she's at. But compared to the crime that she committed, it definitely doesn't feel like she's living the life of regret that would be karmatic justice for it. But at the same time, I think what it really ties into is sort of twofold. First of all, the sort of constant appeal of the promise of governance as safety, as security, to where even though people don't necessarily have a humane or ideological reason to surrender themselves to it, they still do, because the promise, even compromised as they know it to be, is still that seductive, that sort of appealing. And I think less so with Frenzy, but more so with Prairie at the end, when she's wishing that Brock would come back. I think it's, again, just that sort of longing for a stability, longing for the fiction that people like Brock, that the Reagan administration can sort of sell you, that fiction of the American dream, to the point where you're willing to buy into the system, even knowing that the system is not the American dream, that it's very much an American dream at the convenience of certain power structures. And I just think that was captured really interestingly in Frenzy's character. And it also, like I said, just really complicates her. She's not a sympathetic person. She doesn't ever get the redemption that you would expect from a story like this. But at the same time, nor does she ever get her comeuppance, or is treated like an absolute villain that, like, I personally feel her to be. So while it's true that she did something terrible, she isn't totally demonized by, like, her family and Zoid, even once he figures out the truth, and even her daughter or her new husband. She never gets that demonization. So it's just a really interesting way of handling a character like this that I just don't think you would see much in a modern handling of this story. So I think that about wraps up everything I want to say about Vineland. To be honest, I'm surprised that I made it this far for a book that, like I said, was just really complicated and challenging to get through. But was very interesting. Like I said, it gives me very much Cartescu vibes, where I'm intrigued that I didn't like it more, because there's so much about it that I did like. And I feel like I'm going to be kind of much like I did with Cartescu, rapidly searching to really try and hone in on what exactly it isn't making it gel with me, because who knows, maybe with a bit more reading, the more I adapt to it, the more I can find that maybe I really enjoy it. I don't know. We'll see. But what I will say, the copy that I have, which will be the thumbnail for this, The cover, which I know a lot of Pynchon's vintage books have these covers, is absolutely butt fucking ugly, and I hate it. So on that note, I will be doing another video here shortly for the other book that I've been kind of reading in tandem with this. So see you then.